Welcome back to the data strategy workshop. So this is video number 2. And in this video, we go tactical and fill out the actual data strategy workbook in Google Sheets. If you haven't watched video number 1, there is a link in the video description. And in the first video, we go over what is a data strategy, why you need one, and basically all of these steps, like the overview of what it goes into building a data strategy and why we do it that way. In this video, we actually do it. All right. So there is also a link pointing to this workbook in the video description. So the first thing you want to do is click on that link. And when you get here, make a copy of this workbook. All right. So let's get started. So if you remember from video number 1, the first thing you have to do when you're building your data strategy is to identify the stakeholders. So what you're going to do, basically the stakeholders are people that needs to be involved in the project. So you're going to list them out over here. So the name, email, their title. And again, like if some of the stuff here is not relevant to you, you don't have to fill it out, but this is to fit as many use cases as possible, right? Responsibilities. So for example, over here, we have the CFO. So the CFO, his responsibilities will be to provide the definitions for financial metrics and also authorize new data initiatives, so unlocking the budget. So you should place that here. And maybe if you feel like it, you could even place the frequency at which point they need to be involved. So maybe during discovery and at project kickoff, for example. All right. Value example, what I would place here is the angle I'm going to go with to talk with them about this project. So obviously over here, maybe the CFO will be more interested in seeing like the gross margin in real time for each product. Let's say they run an e-commerce. If I'm talking to the CMO, I might talk to them more when I'm trying to kind of explain the benefit of and get them behind the data strategy and get them excited about the project. I would list out here what's interesting to them so that when I communicate with them, I'm speaking their language. All right. Next step, again, if you remember from the first video, we have the discovery phase, which is what are the questions you're trying to answer? What's the current state? And what would be the ideal way of answering those questions? So let's get started with this. So this is the current state. So everything that's in here, that's the current state. And when you meet with them, whether it's one-on-one or maybe you have a big meeting with all of these stakeholders in it, and basically have them list the questions they'd like to be able to answer. So for example, what is our return on ad spend per acquisition channel? In this case, maybe it's just for last year, or maybe they'd like to be able to see that on an ongoing basis. And right now, maybe current way of answering that, maybe they don't have a way to answer that specifically, or the way they have is so inaccurate that it doesn't even qualify to be. I would still list it out. Like if it's good enough for them to spend time doing that inaccurate way, it's worth mentioning here. But sometimes people return on ad spend, they will just look at the overall spend and divide that by how much revenue generated and kind of all approximation. So depending on how they're doing it right now, I would list that here. If they have existing reports or Google Sheets or whatever that they're using to calculate that, I would list them out. The more information, the better. The challenge of the current way. So this is something that's very typical. For example, each ad platform has its own attribution model, which leads to an inflated conversion count. It doesn't take into account from the moment people clicked on the link, then converted into a lead, and then purchase maybe a month later. So if we want to tie back the return on ad spend, we cannot compare from the moment they purchase compared against the ad budget of that month, because it's actually an ad that ran a month ago that converted them and led to the purchase. So maybe that's the challenge of how they're doing it right now. It does not take that into account, and many more reasons. So basically you're going to list all of the problem with the current way of doing it, if you're doing it at all. All right. Now, one thing that's very important is, okay, you have the challenge of current way, but let's say we had this magic bullet and you had the answer to that question. What are the action you would take based on the answer? Would you even know what to do? And this might sound easy to answer, but it's not always the case. Let me give you an example. Let's say they'd like to know what is their website conversion rate, right? And let's say we define conversion rate on a session per session. So every time someone lands on the website, it starts a session. What's the percentage of people that lands on the website and convert? Let's say you had the percentage. Let's say it's 5%. Would you know what to do? Because some people, even if they get that answer, they get it's 5%, now they don't even know what to do because they don't even know if that's good. So it becomes very difficult to prioritize which question is worth answering if you don't have benchmarks. So this is kind of what this question is trying to force you to realize, is if you had the answer to that question, would that still help you take action? Because, okay, we get it. We get the answer. It's 5%. Does that mean we still have to invest a lot of money into improving the landing page, improve the copy or anything? We don't even know if it's good. Maybe it's amazing and we shouldn't prioritize trying to improve the conversion rate. Maybe there's other stuff we could work on that would generate a higher return. Or maybe 5% for your industry is not very good and there's a lot of work to do. So that question here, that's kind of the goal of answering that. All right. Now, sometimes there's some questions that will benefit multiple departments. If that's the case, you list all of the departments that will benefit from answering that question. Because when you're trying to, again, prioritize which questions should be answered first, obviously, if you had one question that would benefit the whole company, like every department, it's probably a very good question to spend time and effort on answering, right? Compared to an answer that could just benefit a single individual, for example. All right. What is the core KPI of the question? It's, in this case, what is our return on ad spend per acquisition channel? The answer is return on ad spend. And this is for the current state. So you're going to do that for every question. What is our customer lifetime value? Average conversion rate for each step of our e-commerce funnel. So from add to cart to, let's say, like from view product to add to cart to begin checkout to purchase. What is the conversion rate for each step, right? So if some questions here don't apply to you, you can feel free to remove them and list your questions in here. So this will take some time. Some question might be redundant, but I encourage you to list as many as you can for now, because at the end, maybe we'll be able to bundle a bunch of them with no additional effort, really. If they are all from the same data source, most of the time, depending on what it is, they won't add that much work to implement. So I would list them out in here and fill out every column as best as I can. The more details, the better. All right. And now we go to the desired state. What would be the ideal way of answering that question? Let's say return on ad spend. Well, it would be in a dashboard. They would see the return on ad spend. They would be able to filter by date, by ad platform, even by campaign, and even down to the ad group level. It would take account into the lag, and it would use a data-driven attribution model, for example. The data would be refreshed daily. So that is the vision. That's how they envision answering return on ad spend and monitoring it daily with a color code to make it really easy to spot underperforming ad group. And even we could implement alerts when let's say an ad group or a campaign is starting to lose its performance, because over time, maybe ad fatigue, and it starts to not perform as well. So this would be the ideal state, right? And then if they feel like it, they could even mock up a dashboard on how they'd like to see this. Because yes, you can follow principle with dashboards and everything, but at the end of the day, making the dashboard the way that the people that are going to use it prefer is what counts. Like, you want people to use the dashboard and be able to understand what's going on. So dashboard, even if it's just like pen and paper or something, place it here. Again, the more info, the better. And you do that for all of the questions, the desired state. What would be like the best way to answer that question for them? Okay. Now, to make some order in all of that, we'll try to kind of prioritize each question. And the way we're going to do that is kind of determine how impactful answering that question would be on the business. So you can do it the simple way and set it up like right away, like high, medium, and low, kind of based on your experience if every stakeholders agree. But if not, you can go here and answer all of these questions. So does answering this question benefit multiple departments? Yes. So yes, that means when it's green like that, it means that it's high impact. It's a indicator for high impact. So the more green you have, the more high impact answering that question would be on the business. So is right now, like, does the individual tasked with responding to this inquiry lack? Basically, does the person that needs to get the return on ad spend, do they have access right now to the data? So if they lack the necessary access, it means that they cannot do their job properly. So by providing with access, we would have a bigger impact. Is this tied to a North Star KPI? Well, if your marketing department is main KPI is return on ad spend, it would be a good thing for them to have access to return on ad spend daily instead of maybe having to wait every 3 months for someone to do like this crazy complicated custom report that's not even accurate. Is this question currently difficult to answer accurately? Again, if it is difficult to answer accurately, then the company would benefit from moving to the desired state, right? So if this is currently difficult to answer accurately, then moving to the desired state when it makes it easy, this would have a big positive impact, right? Is this question currently in a timely manner? Again, if you can only do it every 3 months, moving to the desired state would make this a massive improvement. This makes focusing on this question high impact. Is it directly tied to revenue and profitability? Yes. Does this needs to be answered frequently? Yes. So you fill out all of these questions. I won't go through all of them. And at the end, you'll get this score. Again, there's no formula here. The more green you have, you should consider giving it a score of high. But at the end of the day, you're the one who decide if this is high or not. But those questions are there to help you out, figure it out. Is this a high impact business question or not? And then, if you remember, we have the data quality audit. And this is a bit more technical, but let's go through it. So first, we need to define what do we mean when we mean return on ad spend? How do we actually calculate it? So over here, I've placed the formula. This is an example. Maybe you're calculating it differently, but you would place the formula here. The logic. So maybe the formula is telling part of the story, but not all of the story. So revenue per marketing channel. Okay, but how do we tie revenue back to a marketing channel? Do we look at the revenue reported inside the ad platforms, or we're looking at what Google Analytics is telling us by using the data-driven attribution model? Well, this gives us the additional context. We now know that to get the return on ad spend, according to this, we'll need not only the paid ads data, but also Google Analytics for data to be blended with the paid ads data. So we already see that the complexity of answering that question just went up a notch here, right? So we'll need the ad spend revenue, a number of purchase to calculate that. So these are the numbers we're going to need. So how much we spend, the revenue, and the number of purchase, and the dimensions. So we'll need date, source, medium, campaign. So here, if you feel like it, you don't have to do it that way, but the red one are the one that we absolutely need, let's say. And yellow, it would be nice, like if it adds too much complexity, to be able to filter by that. We're okay with just using the one in reds because we don't want to wait too long before we have those reports. So this adds even more details, but if you don't want to split it like that, that's totally fine. Again, the idea is to have something that makes sense to you. If you see those corners here, there's notes, you can hover over and you'll get some description or additional context as well. What data source do we need to answer that question? So we'll need Meta, Google Ads, LinkedIn Ads, TikTok Ads, and GA4. Okay, good. And now we get to the data profiling exercise where we ask ourselves, what's the current state of that data? Is it even usable? Let's say we built this whole thing in order to answer that question. Would the answer be accurate? Because again, when you're building a data pipeline, It's not a magic bullet. If you have garbage data coming in, most likely you'll get garbage data coming out. All right. So it's very important to assess the state of the data before even start coding or anything. All right. So is the data accurate enough to be used for critical business decisions? Some questions might feel redundant here. If it is, just set them both to yes and move on. Is the data reliable? So right now it might be accurate right now, but is it reliable over time? So are there any gaps in the data? Is the data source of credible and trustworthy? So in this case, the data is system generated, so that's good, but sometimes it's filled out by someone in a Google Sheets, and we don't know how good of a job they're doing with filling out this data. Is the data easily accessible? So do we have access to this data? Is this data already in the data warehouse, or can we access it very easily? Is the data complete? So by complete, we mean, do we have, let's say we want to be able to break down return on ad spend by ad group. Would this even be possible? For example, do our UTMs even contain an ad group, like the ad group in it? If not, it might be difficult to filter down. So that's what complete mean. Is the data consistent? Let's say we've changed 4 times our UTM strategy in the past year. It might make the comparison between historical data and recent data difficult to compare. So that's what we mean by consistent. Is the data well documented? So for example, if you have a field, you know you need ad spend, but then Meta, they don't have an ad spend. It's called cost, and Google Ads, it's called, let's say, ad spend. Do you have an easy way to kind of get the definition of each field for each platform? And for that, you probably need good documentation. So that's what we mean. Is the data source well documented? In this case, those are all well-known platforms. It is well documented. Is the data fresh? Again, in this case, like Google Ads, Facebook Ads, they collect data in real time. So the data is fresh, but sometimes you'll get some data source that gets updated maybe once a month, once a quarter, depending. So the answer here might change. So, okay, good. You have all of these answer. Now here, for any no's that you placed here, just write down exactly what we mean. Like, what is the problem with this data? We were not tracking down to the ad group level prior to 2024. UTM naming conventions were inconsistent before 2024. Our conversion tracking setup was inaccurate. So our maybe Google Tag Manager was, maybe we were tracking using page views instead of a proper data layer prior to 2024, right? So list out the problem and then the possible solution. So let's say, again, using this example, everything's before 2024. So it means that, let's say at the beginning of 2024, you fixed all of that. Now you're tracking at the ad group level and you don't feel like fixing historical data, or maybe you can't. But the solution is very simple. You're okay ignoring past data and just starting from 2024. So what do you set the data quality to? You'll set it to good moving forward. And that's perfectly fine. All right. So that is what we mean with data quality. For the effort, we'll leave that for later on, but that's the last step. And you do that for every question. All right. So I hope this makes sense. So now you've listed a bunch of data source. If we go, where was that? In data quality, a bunch of data source over here, Meta Ads, Google Ads. What you want to do is just list out all of your data source. Now this table, it looks very complicated. You don't have to fill out every single field, but the more you do, and this is kind of a rule of thumb for anything I'm showing in this video, the bigger your organization is, the more complex it is, the more data you're going to have to move around, which means how costly it's going to be to refactor something if you get it wrong. The more you want to go into the fine details here and fit it out. If you're just starting, it's your first data pipeline, and the amount of data you'll have to move doesn't require fancy solutions, then you might not need to fill everything out. But at least fill out these fields. If you can figure out approximately how much data you'll move per month, that'd be good. So Fivetran, what's good about them is if you move, let's say, data from Facebook ads to your data warehouse, the first load is free, and they will give you from that first load an estimate on how much it will cost you moving forward to use that connector. So this is very useful. It's a cheap way to figure it out without having to pay anything. So I strongly suggest you do that. Linking to the documentation, that's always nice. It's gonna save someone time for sure. How often the data needs to be updated if you have very specific need. The idea here is really to just build a list of requirements so that when we are ready to choose the technologies we're gonna use, we can do so with correct information at our disposal, right? We don't want to go and choose technology before we even have our requirements. That's very important. So again, I won't go over everything here because most companies, this will be too much. But if we go over here, for example, let's say you're done with listing out the platform. For those that really want to go the extra mile, you can build what the final tables you need for your dashboard should look like in here. So every field, let's say this would be the table you need in order to run the analysis or answer a bunch of questions. You could list them out and say, all right, this will be from GA4, this will be from Google Ads, this will be from, I don't know which platform, and the logic. And you can go crazy here and really fill that out. Even like what are the tests you're going to run on this table to ensure high level of data accuracy, and even the logic used for those tests. If you have calculated dimensions, so order created date, for example, which is just the date time converted to just a regular date, for example, you could set that up here. So this will give you very granular details, but it's going to be super useful for the person that builds the pipeline. And it's also going to be very helpful for you to choose the technologies and the platforms you're going to use to build your data pipeline. So now you're done with this and you just need to list out all of your requirements. So it needs to handle our projected data volume. So if you've done the 5-tronic exercise, you should have a good idea of the data volume. And basically this could be like, because you're hesitating between just staying between Google Sheets and using BigQuery, and let's just go here and let's do Snowflake, for example. Handles our data volume. Well, you realize now that with the amount of data you have, Google Sheets wouldn't do the trick. And this would, and this would. Okay, so this doesn't, this does, meets our current and future scalability requirements. Compatible with existing IT infrastructure. Let's say you run on the Google stack and it is compatible, Snowflake, but I don't know, maybe you would type something out like that, like yes-ish, or like it is compatible, but not as much as BigQuery. Integrate with key tools, yes, and yes-ish again, for example. So this would be no, this could be partial, and this could be partial as well, for example. Let's say we use partial, and you could even add notes to what you mean exactly by partial. The goal here is just to give you some place to easily compare between your options based on your actual requirements. So let's say you want to run some advanced analytics and machine learning. BigQuery is right now, I think, pretty much the best platform to do so. So if you are hesitating between BigQuery and Snowflake, this might be what makes you go with BigQuery. If you have very specific security features that you need or compliance because you are in healthcare, this is just a place, again, to compare between your options based on your own requirements. So I've listed some here, but this does not mean this applies to your company. Your requirements will be based on what has been uncovered in the discovery and data governance phase. So I hope this makes sense. And again, if you're a smaller organization, you don't necessarily have to go with all of these details. Maybe you just decided to go with the same stack that we use at Systematik and not overcomplicated stuff. That's totally fine. But just be aware that if your company has some very specific requirements, it's much better to know them beforehand so that when you're deciding on the technology, that you're making the right choice. All right. So now with this, you finally decided what's the technology you're going to be using for your data architecture. So now it's time to just use something like Google Draw or any software, maybe Lucidchart, and just do a diagram of what it would look like. Okay, so you have your data source here. These like Google Analytics, BigCommerce, Google Sheets, they connect directly to BigQuery via some sort of native integration. So we don't even need to use Fivetran. So we move the data for free, which is great. Google Ads, Meta, Criteo, we're going to use Fivetran for that. And then Fivetran is going to send the data to Google BigQuery. And Order Groove, unfortunately, doesn't even have a native integration or a Fivetran connector. We're going to have to build a custom API integration to send that data to BigQuery. So knowing that beforehand will be very helpful in prioritizing projects and assessing the effort required to build your data pipeline. All right. So it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Maybe you can add like version control and orchestration to the mix, but the idea is just to see visually what your pipeline is looking like. As you go, I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the video. We have this checklist. Again, you don't have to do everything in here, but this is just to help you out in this process, right? So for each item, so okay, we identified each stakeholders and added them to the stakeholder list. Okay, we created a tailored pitch for each of them. Okay, that's done. Okay, discovery, again, data platform architecture. There's a ton of things here. You don't have to do all of that. If your organization is a small business, you don't have to, but if you're a bigger company, it's worth at least just reading through all of them, remove the ones that you don't feel are relevant to you, and just keep the checklist to what is relevant to you and then use it. It is there. All right. And then we'll move on to the glossary, where we, again, define the KPIs that we're going to use, or each metric. What is the formula? What is the definition? So you can just copy from the data strategy planner and have that in a nice and easy way so that everyone can use it and agree upon all of the definitions. So this is super useful, and this should be done no matter the size of your organization. I see it all the time. And if there's no kind of universal definition that everyone's agree on, what is the user, what is the revenue, what is recurring revenue, if it's from a subscription, or if someone buys again but has no subscription, is that also recurring revenue? Just basically anything that's going to be displayed on the dashboard, it should have a definition. So that's where I would keep that. Okay. Over here, again, you have the KPIs. Those are just the most important metrics. So there's a little bit of redundancies here. This is all metrics and even dimensions. Anything that requires a definition, you could list them here. This is your KPIs. And if you feel like it, again, you can write down who's the owner, who report directly on that metrics, who's evaluated, or they get their performance review based on those KPIs. List them here with the email. You could even list who should receive an alert when the target, for example, is when we're trending below target, or this is for later on, but it's always nice, especially for the person that's going to be building the dashboard, to know what is the target, because then if the person building the dashboard knows what's the target for each KPIs, they can build the dashboard in a way that makes it really easy to show, like, is a DROS of 2 in the dashboard? Is it good or is it not? Well, if the person that builds the dashboard know that the target is 3, they could color code it in a way that if it's below 3, the number is red or something, right? Or how far away is it from the target? Stuff like that. Very important. Okay. So once you have all of that, what you want to do is go back here in the data strategy planner, close this up. And this is the technical part in the implementation. And this is really to assess the technical difficulty of answering that question. So we cannot just go and say, we're going to answer any question that has a high business impact, because some of them might be very difficult technically to answer, or maybe they don't, like, they would be high impact, but the data we currently have is not even good right now. Even if we build the whole thing, the results would be inaccurate, and it's going to take time. If we start collecting good data now today, it might take 2 months before we have enough data to even being able to make meaningful decisions based on this sample size. So not because the business impact is high that you can just go and do it right away. So there's a couple more things to take into account. There's data quality, and there's also the implementation effort, right? So this is more for the technical person to fill out. Is data manually entered? Do we need to map the data and is the mapping manually maintained? If yes, it complicates things. If no, then it's good. It's low effort. High volume of data. What we mean by high volume data is it high enough that we need to do careful considerations due to the size? If no, then great. Do we need to track dimension changes over time? Let me give you an example for that. We call that slow changing dimension. For example, but not necessarily as slow changing dimensions, but do we need to keep track over time? For example, you have an e-commerce and you have SKU. For each product, there is a cost that it costs you. Let's say you sell, I don't know, meat online, right? You sell meat and your chicken breast costs you, I don't know, $5. If the price moved to $6, we don't want the historical data to change because you paid $5 for that chicken breast back in the day, but now it's $6. We need to track the changes over time, which complicates things, right? We need to create snapshots, and so it adds to the complexity, right? Sometimes complex logic, this is up to you, but if you find yourself thinking that this metric is the result of a complicated formula with a lot of if statement, then it's a complex logic. Like it's just not a base metric like number of clicks. We are interested only in clicks happening in that time of the day for that campaign on that specific platform on Mondays only. Then now it's a complex logic. It's just not clicks anymore. It's a lot of things, right? So you fill that out. I won't go through all of them, but they all have a definition, so you can go through it. And if you're lucky, you'll end up with green. And this is a low-hanging fruit, right? So this would be a good question to start with. And you do that for every question. And at the end, you'll get a pretty good idea of what should be your first project that could deliver value and so on. All right. So when you get to that point, you can break it down depending on how you plan your sprints or project internally and kind of do a timeline here. Again, you probably won't do this in this Google Sheets. You probably have a project management tool, but this is what it would look like. And yeah, so now you're good to go. You have a solid plan, and the chances of you needing to refactor something or rebuild the whole thing or just start a data initiative that won't deliver value went from very, very high to very low. And this is the goal of a data strategy. So I hope this was useful. So if you have any feedback, comment, let me know in the comments below. If you want to reach out, please go on our website, systematicdata.com, or you can send me an email at eric@systematicdata.com. And if you need help implementing a data strategy and you want to hire us, then go ahead, reach out, and it's going to be a pleasure to see if we're a good fit and if we can work together. I hope you find this useful, are not too intimidated by the amount of work. Again, this will drastically change from the size of your organization, how much work you have to put in your data strategy. That's it. Yeah, thank you. Have a great day. Cheers.